This is a total joke.
Justin's gonna cry now.
Look at me.
They're so mean to me.
I'm not. It's not because you're mean. It's because this is a joke.
Yeah. Okay.
The show is a joke. It would be better if this was like we had a bunch of 8-year-olds on the show. They would probably be more technologically advanced than you guys.
Yo, Twitter, thank you so much. Justin used to have 17.3 thousand followers. He's down to 17.1. So unfollow Justin has been a smashing success. Hashtag cancel Justin.
Okay, this is a great way to start off the show this week. It's episode 278. Going to be talking about big corporations, maybe a little bit of Joe Biden talk. Maybe Trump will edge his way in here. We're not sure yet. We'll see what happens. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendall. Joining me today, I've got Justin Haskins, editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing okay.
Are you?
I don't know, honestly. I don't know. You know, it's like I sent you guys a very clear breakup letter a few weeks ago. And then somehow I ended up on the show again.
Yeah, and then you came crawling back.
No. I didn't come crawling back.
Oh, yes, you did.
No. I had to come back to dispel the QAnon conspiracy theories about me. I had no choice.
Yeah, so why are you back now?
Yeah, that's a great question, Isaac. Thanks for asking.
It is a great question.
The reason why I'm back this week is because I got this cryptic, very suspect text message from Donald the other night saying, basically begging me, to come on the show because Jim wasn't going to be on the show. That's what I was told.
Oh.
Then all of a sudden, magically, we couldn't make it work out or whatever. And now Jim's on the show and I'm also on the show.
So why don't you just take that as an opportunity to not be on the show? You have some agency here, Justin.
No. Hold on a second. What's going on here is very clear.
The government made me do it.
No, it wasn't the government. I very clearly broke up with the show. And this is one of those classic situations where, you're in a breakup. You clearly don't want to be in the relationship. The other side clearly wants you in the relationship. So then you get a phone call at like 9:00 at night because your car doesn't work mysteriously. And so then you go to pick them up. And then all of a sudden, like a week later, you're back in the relationship again. And it turns out there was nothing wrong with the car all along. It was all a big scam. So I want to make it very clear. I want to make it because I'm a good guy, Isaac. That's why. Because I'm a good guy.
That's not it at all.
I don't leave people stranded on the side of the road. So I just want to be very clear. Like, I'm just not into you guys. Like, I'm just not. Okay? The relationship it's got to end. This has got to stop. It's got to stop.
I think you're thinking with the wrong head. I think that you can't quit us.
Or policy fellow at the center of the American experiment. I get that right this time.
That's right. Justin can't quit us. That's what the problem is.
That's right. Jim Likely, VP of the Heartland Institute. Aren't you glad to be a part of this?
I have never been more glad. And, Justin, I hope that, we can still be friends, right? We can just still be friends. We can just stay in the friend zone. That would be ideal.
Is that fine?
I mean, I hope so. I hope we can find a way to make it work, but I don't know.
We don't have to hang out all the time. We don't have to hug or hold hands, but, we can still be friends and, see each other with other people.
Right.
Yeah. That's fine. That's fine.
So I'm pulling an audible. I originally had us starting off this conversation reminiscing about the Trump years, and we're going to talk about the transition of power into Biden and some of his executive orders. I think it's still kind of worth talking about some of his executive orders, but we're going to save that to the end because I am way more interested in our kind of what now is our main topic, which is just kind of like the power of the corporations that they're wielding recently. And but I was reading through like a number of the articles that I have lined up for this episode, and I started to think, and maybe this is like my weekly conspiracy theory segment right up front, that we're getting awfully close to having like a social credit system in America. So the social credit score type concept was kind of brought into the public mindset by China over the last couple of years, where they had the social credit system, which if you're not aware of it, you should look it up. It's pretty interesting, but it's basically like, China has a system where, based on like if you're breaking any rules or laws, talking bad about the government, having certain religious beliefs, depending on what website you go to, you get a social credit score. And then depending on how high or low your social credit score, it could determine whether or not you could use public transit, what areas you can live in, the loan accessibility, a whole number of things could be determined by your social credit score. So then I was thinking, about some of the more recent stories that we've talked about on this podcast and some of the stories we're going to talk about today. But between like cancel culture and people's like media posts from years ago being like haunting them to this day, calls for like a blacklist of supporters, Simon and Schuster pulling their book deal from Senator Josh Hawley because of how he voted on a certain topic, banks refusing to do basic banking duties with people from the Trump family, banks refusing to do services with certain industries, whether it's fossil fuels or gun manufacturers, Amazon, Google, and Apple all colluding to take out Parler, Chuck Schumer calling for those that participated in the protests at the Capitol building to be put on a federal no-fly list. And then, like, generally the concept of the Great Reset and using these contrived woke metrics to rate businesses. I think that we are getting very close to having a social credit system, not necessarily run by the government, but by Google and Amazon. And I think that, like, in the future, maybe it's months from now, maybe it's years from now, I think that, like, based on your social media history, your carbon footprint, whether you own guns, your diet, a whole number of things could be incorporated into this credit system. And then depending on your score, it'll determine whether or not you have discounts on products, inclusion in certain events, whether you could use public transit, loan accessibility, what areas you could live. I don't even know. But like, talk me off this ledge. Am I going crazy here, or are you seeing, down the same pipeline as I am? Feel free.
Who are you throwing it to? You're the host. You need to designate a speaker. That's your job. Do your job.
Let's go to Justin, since he's, a very sensitive person. Needs to be attended to quite carefully. So go ahead, Justin.
Thank you, Jim, for that accurate description of my personality. I totally agree. In fact, we actually have an employee here at the Heartland Institute who showed us, Donnie and I, what was that, like a month or two ago?
Yeah.
His financial service. He has a financial services company that he uses. It's like a Fidelity type company. It's not Fidelity, but it's like that, right? And he logged into his account, and in his account, it actually gave him essentially a social credit score, an ESG score,
right,
for his investments. And it said, here's your score. Here's your sustainability, or whatever they called it, score. If you want to improve your score, you should invest in these things over here. So they actually already rolled this metric out and awarded him a score for his investments. So the idea that this is far off into the future, no, it's not far off into the future. This is already starting to happen. It's already starting to be rolled out, and it's going to continue to expand over the next couple of years. I think this year is really going to be the beginning of this whole movement. And I think you're going to see by this time next year, I think there's so many of these kinds of things that are going to start being, I think we're going to have already seen a lot of these things built into society, and it's not going to seem crazy at all. It's going to seem like, yeah, this is just, it's all over the place. And why wouldn't there will be all these people saying, well, of course, why wouldn't we have something like this? Don't you want to know, whether or not you're being sustainable? And don't you want this person over here to, you don't want people who are, whatever.
Shouldn't people be rewarded for,
exactly, for being good citizens, right? That's the whole notion of this. That's how it's going to be sold. I don't think there's any doubt at all that this is coming. It's just a matter of time. And unless there's lots of pushback against it, and there would have to be a lot, I don't think there's any way to avoid this.
Well, Jim, I mean, you seem to be a skeptic of things that Justin and I kind of look into the future, whether it's modern monetary theory or maybe to a lesser extent the Great Reset.
Wow,
Donnie. A limb here.
You just threw tons of shade at Jim. You're like, oh, Jim, you tend to be wrong about things like this when Justin and I are prophetic.
Exactly.
Tell us, underling, what do you think? That's what you just said.
Yeah, no, I'm not denying that. Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, well, that's not how I heard it, and it's a good thing for you that I didn't hear it that way. Yeah, I mean, you're right. Justin outlining that we already have basically a social credit system in this country, like China, which is scary. And I think for years now, we've had like a soft social credit system, right? So, but actually for quite a while, if you think back to, it was quite common for leftist activists on campus, for instance, right? To pressure, to demonstrate, to pressure their universities to divest from, say, fossil fuel companies, because fossil fuel companies are poisoning the earth and are going to destroy the earth and end life for humans as we know it. So it is immoral for Yale University or Harvard University or Cal Berkeley to be investing in Exxon or any other fossil fuel companies. And a lot of these universities have capitulated to the leftist pressure on those sorts of things. But it's, as everything else, as like every other bad trend in the world, in the United States, it always gets worse, and it always continues, and it rolls along, and it is getting worse. Deutsche Bank, for instance, one of the largest, might be the largest, financial services company in the world, made a big public announcement that they are no longer going to be doing business with the Trump Corporation. Now, so they're making a moral judgment that the Trump Corporation, especially after what happened at the Capitol, which we could get into, that was already planned before he even spoke. The CNN and Washington Post even said that. So the idea that, Trump caused that all to happen spontaneously is false. But after the Capitol Hill incident, Deutsche Bank announces, public announcement, we're not going to be doing business with the Trump Corporation anymore. New York City said that we are going to, I think the Trump Corporation runs the skating rink in Central Park and some other kind of public accommodation, public things in New York City. And Mayor Bill de Blasio said we are going to cancel all those contracts with the Trump Corporation. And so they are being canceled, for lack of a better term. But, interesting, if Deutsche Bank as a corporation feels it's important to stop doing business with the Trump Corporation, they could just stop doing business with the Trump Corporation. They don't have to make a big show of it. And because they feel they have to make a big show of it, they have to virtue signal. That's where you get into the idea that we do have a social credit system in this country. Because what's the point of a social credit system if you can't brag about how good your social credit score is? And that's what all of so many of our corporations are doing now, because, if you cancel Trump, that gives you, it gives you 10 extra points on your social credit score. It's like we're living in one of those Black Mirror episodes,
right?
Where you think, that you walk around and everybody knows what your score is. Black Mirror, talk about not being paranoid and not being a conspiracy theory, but some fiction that seems to be coming true. Black Mirror is starting to come true in this world today. And, this is going to continue. It's a bad trend. And because it only goes one way. Can you imagine if what a university would do if a conservative organization on campus protested and said that the university cannot support, say, Planned Parenthood anymore, or can't support any leftist cause whatsoever? They would be, one, laughed off campus. They'd probably be sanctioned, and they'd probably be punished somehow by the university. And so, just like everything else, it seems like all of this social credit stuff, all of the virtue signaling, it's all virtue signaling for leftist things and attitudes, which makes it even worse.
Isaac, feel free to jump in here. You think I'm going crazy? Should I put on the tinfoil hat?
No, not entirely. So I guess we'll talk about this more later. But the problem with the banking industry is how heavily regulated it is, and the way that federal regulations dictate who they can and cannot lend to. So there's really not a private market mechanism. You can't have a bank that just says, okay, well, we're not going to follow all of these Freddie and Fannie guidelines anymore. So yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what really made me start thinking about this is, well, a couple of things. One was just a couple of weeks ago with the Parler thing, right? Amazon, Google, Apple, all seemingly pulling their weight and crushing this competitor to Twitter. It wasn't because of anything that the government did, any government action. This was all, corporations, private businesses, voluntary exchange, whatever, free association that like crushed this thing. So it's just like, wow, it seems like, I should maybe be a little bit more afraid of the actions of, places like Amazon and Google. And like, obviously, some people are already along this line of thinking because of the seemingly squashing of conservative speech across these platforms. But I think Parler getting nuked was like a big wake up call for me. And, it just makes me think of, there was an article from the World Economic Forum, which obviously is the biggest proponent of the Great Reset and all that concept. So Justin and I have been kind of focusing on them recently, but there was an article, and I think we even talked about it on the show, where they were saying that in the future, you're not going to own anything. Everything is going to be supplied by services, so you won't actually own a house. You'll only ever rent, you won't own a car. You only ever rent it, and you'll be much happier about this. And I was thinking, like, if that's the case, then the private companies or corporations that you're renting these things from, they're not constrained by, the Bill of Rights or anything like that. So what's stopping them from saying that if you're living in one of our houses, you're renting one of our houses, you can't own a gun, So it's like, should we be more concerned about like the actions of these big corporations than maybe we were 5 years ago? Jim, you were going to say something.
I was going to say maybe you can rent a gun to protect your rented belongings, right? But I guess not.
Yeah, I don't know, Justin.
Yeah, well, I think this is such an important point for people to understand. I think that there is a development that is going on within the conservative movement where people are starting to realize that it's not government per se, just on its own, that you have to worry about. Obviously, we are very concerned about government. We're concerned about the centralization of power. But I think what we're learning is that we need to be concerned about the centralization of power, period, regardless of where it is in society. Because corporations, when they get very large and powerful and have all these special legal protections and everything, as they have over many years, and they start working hand in hand with government to form this coalition of sorts of people who are all working in tandem to try to produce a certain kind of society, I think you do have to be concerned that, too much power in one place is always bad. And that's what we're seeing. It's not, in the past, conservatives, I think, sort of looked at big businesses and they said, well, big businesses, they're just trying to make money. They're good for the economy. When they get very large, it's oftentimes because they've been very successful, and therefore, economic growth is good and we need to encourage economic growth. And so they've been, traditionally, the conservative movement has for many years been pro big corporation, frankly. I mean, those are the policies of many people, and not everybody, but a lot of people on the right have supported big corporations because it's good for the economy, adds lots of jobs, all of that. But what we've learned is that these corporations have become so big and so powerful, and they're now working so closely with government that it's hard to say where the government ends and the corporation begins. It's all kind of melded together, where the corporation is doing what the government wants in order to get bailouts, in order to get all of this money from the government. That's not just bailouts, but government contracts, all these trillions of dollars that are being printed and pumped into the economy, special tax breaks and loopholes and carve-outs and these continuing resolutions and things that are passed in Congress all the time. And so what's happening is they're all becoming one entity. It's slowly happening. It's not official, but it is there. And that is extremely, extremely dangerous. When you have the most powerful institutions in society all working together, it's never good for individual liberty, for small business owners, for entrepreneurs, for all of these other people. And so we're starting to see a dividing line. And what's really interesting about this is that there is a wing of people on the right who would totally disagree with everything I'm saying about big corporations. And there's also a wing of people on the far left who would totally agree with me about everything that I'm saying about corporations. And so it's this weird area that we're entering now where I sort of agree with Bernie Sanders when he gets on TV and talks about how bad it is for these big corporations to be running all of these things. And I've got libertarians who would say, I shouldn't be saying that it's bad that these corporations have so much power. And so I'm in this really weird space now where I don't know, in a lot of ways, I don't recognize this political sphere, this ideological sphere that I'm in, but I do believe that this is where conservatives are moving. And I think that what's happening with social media companies is actually the thing that's pushing us all in that direction, because now it's tangible, it's real, they are doing something to you as an individual that it's not a conspiracy or whatever. Like, they're actually doing something to you. They're making sure that you can't talk about certain things. And so it makes that power, you feel the power in your daily life. You understand it's real and that they can do it whenever they want. And if this continues to go in this direction, and it looks like it is, then I think we have a lot to be concerned with. So I think this is an incredibly important topic, and I think it's time for people on the right to start having this conversation. What is our view of these large, powerful corporations? Should we be continuing to support policies that are making it easier for them to have more power? Or should we be ideologically and politically opposed to the centralization of power, period? I think that's an important conversation that we need to have.
Well, we've always been against corporatism, right? So corporatism is the unification. It's crony capitalism, if you want to call it that, right? So this unification of big business and big government is really the problem. And I think that, I was on this train in 2008 when I went down to Iowa and campaigned for Ron Paul during my Christmas break, right? So there's been this, I think libertarians, it's weird that you say some of them are like defending the big business, because I think it's pretty easy to make the argument that, it's not necessarily the fact that this business is big that makes it a problem. It's the fact that it's so married to government policy and crafting that government policy that excludes creates barriers to entry for competition. That's really the problem here. So,
that's a great point. I think, though, that the reason why I've come to this conclusion that it is related to the size of the corporation is because the reason corporatism exists, the reason we have crony capitalism, is because the corporation has become so powerful that it's able to use that power to create those arrangements for themselves. And so you got to understand, big corporations, their primary goal is to make money, right? And so they're going to make money any way they can make money. And if that means going overseas, going to China or something, then that means going to China or Mexico or whatever. If that means basically bullying local governments and state governments to provide them with all these big tax breaks in order to stay in XYZ place or to move to XYZ place, then that's what they're going to do too. They're going to do whatever they can to make more money, and they don't care that might not be conservative. That doesn't matter to them. What matters to them is that they're making more money. Right. And if they're not massive, then they don't have the ability to hold cities and states hostage the way that they do now, because half of all workers in this country work for large businesses. Most of those large businesses are big corporations, and a corporation can very easily go to a state or a city and say, we're going to leave town unless you give us a big tax break. And what choice do they have but to do that? So ideally, what a libertarian would say is, well, the government shouldn't be giving into that. If all the governments just didn't give into that. But if you're some government in some part of the country that doesn't have XYZ corporation, and you think to yourself, well, gee, we got to do something for economic development here, why wouldn't you try to buy the corporation off to bring them into your area? I mean, It makes perfect sense, right?
Or if you're the mayor of that town and you have 40,000 people working for an Amazon distribution center, you want 40,000 voters pissed off at you because they're all out of work? No,
but you don't even
whatever you can to keep them in town.
It doesn't even need to be a huge corporation in order to do that. Like Mercury Marine in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, basically pulled that a while ago. They said, if the state of Wisconsin or Fond du Lac doesn't give us tax breaks, we're going to move to Oklahoma, and that was enough to get their tax breaks, right? Mm-hmm. So, but what's your solution? Like, you can have like small to medium sized companies pull the same thing in certain locations. So, I guess. What's the fix here?
Right. That I think is the most difficult part of all of this.
Right.
Is
it's easy to complain about it. And
the fix is but this is the thing. What I know, the fix, here's what I know. What we're doing now, it's not working. I know that. And I know that increasing the power of these corporations and merging corporate interests with government interests is not the answer. I know that's not going to work. So I agree that finding the solution for how do you limit the influence and power of these large corporations is a very difficult thing to do. And I fully get that. But we're not even really, the right hasn't even really been having these conversations. We've just sort of ignored it entirely and said, well, it's the free market. But the thing is, it's not the free market. These big corporations in many cases are only able to exist as big corporations because of all of these special tax breaks that they get and government funds that they get and special legal protections and liability protections and all these things that individuals can't have. For instance, big corporations, most people don't know this, but big corporations are able to buy health insurance for their employees across state lines. Okay? But historically, a small business owner could never do that. So some guy who owns a small restaurant could not buy health insurance across state lines for his employees, but some big corporation right down the street could do that for its employees. So they have all these special advantages that other businesses and individuals don't have. And so it's not a free market that produced these big corporations. It's government that produced these big corporations. And the more we print money and the more that there's this money just floating around for anyone to have in society, the more we go down that road, the easier it's going to be for these big corporations to say, you know what, I'm going to chase that money instead of trying to produce high quality goods and services. Who cares? It's way easier just to buy off some politicians or threaten politicians that we're going to leave town, unless you give us what we want. That's way easier than trying to be more efficient and trying to figure out, what's the next great innovation in our industry. And that's the danger that we have. So I know it sounds like kind of a cop-out. I don't know what the solution is totally. I have some ideas about that, but a lot of people wouldn't agree with me on the right. And so I don't know what the answer is. I just know that we need to be working on that to find the answer, because what we're doing now is heading down an extremely problematic road.
I don't know if I agree, though, right? Like, the Fracking Revolution wasn't the result of a large corporation, right? It was small entrepreneurs that had to make a living, and they squeezed this gas out of a shale formation in Texas that was never accessible before. So when these companies get big, they get complacent, and then that leaves them vulnerable to disruption. And I'm not saying that you're wrong in that they are definitely manipulating government regulations and laws in order to reduce the possibility of that happening. Absolutely, 100%. So
that's a great example, though, Isaac, because big corporations are working with government right now to try to destroy the fracking industry. That's the whole point that I'm making. There's all these big corporations that look at that and say, we don't want that. We're willing to work with government to destroy fracking and natural gas and all of those things. And instead, there's all these big corporations out there and big companies and whatever that are seeking handouts from the government to build, solar facilities instead. That's what's happening. So they are trying to kill the innovative industries in order to, further their own personal interests. I mean, if you were to go to Target or even these big corporations have nothing to do with the energy industry, they're now openly out there bashing natural gas for reasons that have nothing to do with their own personal business interests, other than they want to make sure that people in government are happy with their views on energy.
Can I bring this back to the tech example, please? Because, frankly, it's not the abuse of market power on the examples you guys have brought up, like buying health insurance across state lines. They can do it, but a smaller company can't do it. The fracking and all that. That is small beer. We started this conversation talking about the power of big tech. It started as it was a snowball. Started with banning Donald Trump as president of the United States from Twitter, and then it evolved into, we've had years of shadow banning of conservative speech. We had the New York Post story on Hunter Biden that was factually true and was suppressed was disappeared by Twitter and Facebook. It was not allowed to be shared by anybody because that was going to be harmful to Joe Biden. And then we ended up with Parler getting nuked and I think it's important to think of big tech this way. They're a cartel. And if you can't tell me that this was all coincidental, that Parler is nuked from space basically in the span of 12 hours. It was a Thanos snap, to use another analogy. And it's because the big tech cartel decided long ago, but really enforced it right after and right up to the election, that conservative speech needs to be suppressed. It needs to be eliminated, frankly. And that's what getting rid of Parler was. That's what, Thanos snapping 10 million accounts on Parler, just people who believe in free speech and want to talk to each other. You just take that away. That's the most dangerous abuse of power. It's much more dangerous than all these other, abuses of market power that corporations may have. Look, we're a conservative libertarian organization. We don't all agree on everything. And I've had some really interesting conversations, as have, I'm sure, everybody on this podcast, Isaac, Donnie, and Justin, with people that are, I'm glad we're having this conversation because people are kind of conflicted on it because, I talked to somebody the other day and I used the term, it was the market dominance of Twitter and Facebook and Google, especially, and Amazon with all those websites that are hosted on Amazon Web Services. They have overwhelming market dominance, and the response was, "Well, market dominance isn't inherently bad." As you alluded to, Justin, market dominance means that you're the best, you're the winner. It was survival of the fittest, and you are providing the most efficient, cheap, best service or product or whatever, and you're the winner. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing if somebody has market dominance. And in fact, it wasn't a bad thing until 2016 when Donald Trump was elected. Then it became a very bad thing. And then in 2020, it became an even worse thing. And it's bad because if you have market dominance, if you are part of a cartel that is deciding arbitrarily and in applying rules unfairly, not fairly across the board, but unfairly against your ideological opponents because you are an ideological company, that is extremely dangerous, and that needs to be stopped. There needs to be a way to figure this out, to allow free speech again on social media and on the digital space in general. And instead, we have this big tech cartel basically being the enforcement arm of big left, of leftism that is dominant in corporate boardrooms. It's dominant in our government. It's dominant in the deep state. It's dominant in Hollywood. It's dominant in our academia. But corporations now, they are the ones that are actually enforcing all of this leftism on us instead of the government. So, hey, it's not the government, so it's not violations of free speech. Yeah, because the government is basically employing the cartel of big tech to enforce these in their place.
But that's the point. That's the point, is that they're so closely tied in all these other ways too. The free speech thing is a huge thing for sure. There's no doubt about it whatsoever. But that's just the beginning. Like that's not, just wait until you can't get a loan.
Yeah.
Or just wait until you can't get a job. Just wait until all of those aspects also play into it that have nothing to do with social media companies. This is just the first area where it's become most apparent. But these corporations and all these other fields are also closely tied to government in the same way that in fact, in many ways, social media was less likely to do this because social media doesn't depend financially on the government in any way, really. And yet there are all sorts of industries out there that do depend on the government financially. And those are it's going to be really easy to get those companies to get in line and to start doing similar kinds of things because they want to make sure that the people in power are happy. And so, I mean, I think it's bigger even than the social media companies. The ties that have been built over all these decades between corporations and government are now going to be utilized in a way that they've never been utilized before. And that's the danger. And that's what social credit scores and all that. That's how they all play into this. And it does get around constitutional protections and everything else if the Constitution is interpreted strictly in the sense that, you don't have any rights with some big corporation. You only have it's only between you and the federal government, and that's it. If that's how it's being applied, then yeah, we have no protection against this whatsoever. And I think that this is a huge, huge problem for this country going forward.
Yeah, my biggest concern with all this is just like how effective, like the corporations are when they're kind of setting their sights on something. If it was like as ineffective as, Target doesn't want to sell this brand of clothes or something, so I could just go to Walmart. Like, it's not a big deal, right? That I don't think I would have as big of a deal with it. And historically, it seems like that was the case when it came to kind of free exchange and whatever association. But I'm reading through some of these articles, and they're talking about the banking, banks refusing to do business with certain industries. And the one that's brought up is this Anwar province, drilling in the Anwar province, and how Democratic lawmakers sent a letter with environmental groups signing on to all of the major banks saying don't do business with people that want to drill in this Anwar province. And all of the banks agreed and said, okay, we won't do it. So as far as I'm aware, and Isaac, you could probably correct me if I'm wrong, that development of that land is completely halted. Not because of any action of the government. Yeah, I know that Democrat, lawmakers signed on to this thing, but it was just because banks cut off that stream of potential, loan or financing. That's pretty effective.
Yeah, I think that they would have to go through some sort of private lender in order to do that. And private being a non-bank lending thing. So it's still possible, but it is much more difficult. Absolutely. Yeah.
And let's say they turn their sights on gun manufacturing next. It's God, the political struggle of just putting any more regulations on the Second Amendment, just how long of a process that is. But if they were to do the same thing that they were doing with this Anwar thing, but to gun manufacturers, all of these big corporations just cutting off their ties with that, you could essentially see some dramatic changes when it comes to our Second Amendment. It's kind of scary. I was talking to a friend of mine, and they're bringing up some of this stuff. And they're like, what we need? We need to just have it, secede with Texas or something like that. And I'm like, yeah, but if you were to do that, I'm like, you would essentially be Cuba, because all of these giant corporations are going to boycott you.
Right.
It's not because of actions of the government. It's these giant corporations that are going to basically make sure that you're driving in cars that were made 40 years ago or whatever. I don't know. That's my biggest concern with this, is how effective these corporations are at it.
Yeah, they're very effective at it, and there's really how do you stop this without limiting the power of these corporations? That's the whole point. Yeah, I don't think that it's possible to do. I don't think we can live in a world where it's just well, we're just going to let these corporations get as big and powerful as they want, and we'll just trust that they won't use that power to, do these things. They've proven over and over and over. They could not have possibly been clearer. There are numerous CEOs of major corporations that have come out and said very plainly, we are pursuing this agenda. This is our agenda. We're going to pursue it. They could not be clearer. So what are we going to do? Just sit around and say, well, I guess they have the right to do that. Well, you know what they don't have the right to do? To take our tax dollars through all of these gigantic bailouts and then use those tax dollars to punish people that they don't like. I don't see how how that could be allowed. Why is it that the government that's funded by everybody in America who pays taxes, why that government is then able to give special legal protections and tax rates and all sorts of things to these big corporations who then turn around and use that power to punish those same people? It's not, these entities are not creatures of the free market. They're not. They are creatures of government. And so if they're creatures of government, then it should be okay to restrain them in some fashion, because it's the government that allows them to exist, and the government is supposed to be working for me. Well, are these big tech companies working for me right now? It sure as hell doesn't feel like they're working for me.
Whoa, hockey sticks word, Justin. Let's keep it clean for the children who listen to this podcast every week.
Yeah. What children are those, Isaac?
Sam, Kendall.
That's
right.
Good point.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, so there is I was going to say proposal, but I think it actually did go into effect. There was this new rule from the Comptroller of the Currency, the U.S. Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, that was basically, this rule was aimed at ensuring fair access to banking services provided by national banks, federal savings associations, and agencies of foreign bank organizations to industries that aren't breaking laws, essentially. Like, you can't cut off services to these people if they're being completely lawful, just because of, political agenda. We don't want to fund fossil fuels. Like, if they're not breaking the law, you have to have equal access to, financing or loans or whatever. And this got proposed. It went into effect. And there are people on our side of the aisle that are against this. Okay, so I've got this one article from the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and it's senior fellow John Burlew, who basically says that this is a horrific rule that's going to have disastrous consequences. It flies in the face of the First Amendment and freedom of association, and basically says that, like, you might be championing this rule when it's helping the development of the Anwar province or something like that, but you're not going to be happy when it's used against you in certain cases. And then basically says that this just amounts to more red tape and regulations for businesses or banks to deal with. So, to Justin's point, it seems like, this is a topic that's going to divide people on our side of the aisle. But Jim, do you think like regulations like this have a place, or what?
Well, yeah, it is a tough question, and I get the argument that they're making over there at CEI, and Heartland works with CEI quite a bit. They're good friends of ours, and I get the point. I get the argument they're trying to make. But really, what is the policy alternative to preventing banking services from canceling, as you mentioned, Donnie, canceling? They say the NRA, you're not able to get any loans from us because you are responsible for increasing gun violence in the United States. And then what's the next step would be? What would be what would stop a financial services corporation from saying, Heartland Institute, you're not going to be able to use any of our services because we find you responsible for spreading, harmful climate disinformation on that is endangering our planet and the future generations. So we're not going to allow you to use our services. It's not a very long road from those two places, or from where we are now to right there. And we have it right now that financial giants are canceling or threatening to cancel the ability of people to support right-wing leading groups through PayPal and or process payments through MasterCard. People that own websites have been told, nope, your PayPal account has been canceled. You're not allowed to raise funds with us anymore. And what's to stop a financial services company that allows for an organization to pay bills digitally, right? From using their services. Like, no, Heartland, you're going to cause a climate catastrophe through your disinformation. So we're going to cut you off. You can't pay bills digitally anymore. If you take away the ability of an organization or a business to either get sales or donations and to pay bills or use digital financial services of any kind, they're dead. You've killed them. If you can't do those things, you don't exist. And so what we see here is kind of depressing. It's basically the giants of corporate America have become the enforcement arm of a powerful leftist state. And there's a name for that kind of a political system. It's on the tip of my tongue. What is it? Something begins with an F, maybe? I can't remember.
Friendship?
Not friendship.
Friendlyism.
Friendlyism. Sure, let's call it that.
Yeah. Fascism. Oh, I think that's what you're looking for.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, I don't know. Isaac, what are your thoughts?
So one of the biggest reasons that we have this problem is the fact that the banks are already so heavily regulated in the first place, and like small banks don't have the ability to make the loans without going through federal hoops, right? So my dad said that, before the financial crisis, if he needed to go get a loan, he could just walk into the bank, give them the serial numbers on the combine as collateral, and then get a loan, right? But afterwards, he had to do so much paperwork that he just said it wasn't worth the effort. So I understand why we want to have a rule that says you can't discriminate based on the end result or the political fashionability of some of this stuff. But really, we do need to try and get to the root cause of it, which is the stranglehold that the federal government has on our financial system and the lending industry in the first place.
Yeah, could you imagine if Donald Trump was like sent out a letter with Republicans signing on to banks saying that you need to like cut off all ties to Black Lives Matter or something in the heart of like the protests, in the summer. Like if anyone was calling him wasn't calling him a fascist before that, they certainly would have been after that. So yeah, I think your labeling of it, Jim, is totally apt. Well, any other thoughts on this before we shift topics?
Yeah, just real quick. I wonder if Justin could react to it as well. But what broke the back of Jim Crow laws in the South was basically, what we've come to know as the concept of a public accommodations, right? So you run a diner and you can't refuse service of Black folks because even though you're a private business, you are a public accommodation and you must not discriminate on basis of race. Right? That's awesome. That's fantastic. But we have right here, and then again, I brought this case up, this example up the other day, the Christian baker in Colorado who was morally opposed to same-sex marriages. He considers baking cakes an art. It is called the culinary arts after all. And he felt he should not be compelled to basically perform art for something that he was morally objected to. He was told, nope, bake the damn cake. But we live in a place now where Twitter, one of the most powerful corporations in the world today, is not told to post the damn tweet. They're not a public accommodation. And I guess we're going to not consider banks a public accommodation where they're supposed to accept all lawful business and not discriminate based on ideology, of course, or race or anything else. So a bank could actually get in a lot of trouble for discriminating against racial minorities, but they will not get in any trouble. In fact, we'll go back to it, social credit points for refusing to do service with people that are on the outside, like the Trump Corporation or conservatives or anybody who just disagrees with the left. And so I think maybe there needs to be some lawsuits out there kind of clarifying some of this gray area, that why isn't Twitter and Facebook, while a private business, a public accommodation that is not allowed to discriminate based on viewpoint? Why aren't banks public accommodations that are not allowed to discriminate based on what people are going to use the loan for if it's a lawful activity? These don't seem to be very difficult questions when you break them down that way to me.
Yeah, well, and I think that the important thing for me, at least, is that I'm all for, to a large extent, individuals and even individual owners of businesses to have as many freedoms and rights as possible, even if that means doing things that are kind of discriminatory depending on the situation. But what makes this different, and in a really important way, is that, again, these corporations are not individuals. They are entities that only exist because of government.
Yeah.
And so if they only exist because of government, then you should be able to some degree regulate them so that they're working for everybody in some fashion. Because if they are just able to cater to some people and not other people, then how is that fair to all of the people that are paying taxes to the government that allowed these companies to get as big and powerful as they've got? It just doesn't make any sense at all. It's not a free market. And so to treat it like, well, this is a free market and they have rights and they can do whatever they want, as if it's the same thing as some farmer somewhere who has a piece of land and you want to, provide all of these regulations and rules about the farmer on that land. It's not the same thing at all. Because these people, these organizations, these gigantic corporations are not part of the free market. They're not individual people. They are entities that exist because of government. And they have been allowed to get huge, and in some cases worth billions and billions of dollars, because of government. And the social media giants are the biggest example of that. They would not exist if it were not for special government rules. They wouldn't exist at all. So why are they able to use these special government rules to then turn around and treat some people differently than other people? They shouldn't be allowed to do it based on anything, whether it's religion or race or political ideology or whatever. They should be working for everyone, providing a service for everyone, because they only exist because of the government, which supposedly represents everyone. I think it's a pretty straightforward argument. And I think that people on our side who look at this as a free market issue need to take a step back and really ask themselves, is this really a free market at all anyway? If you are truly a free market purist, the most truly free market thing you could do is dismantle the entire corporate system entirely and just get rid of all of it. Get rid of limited liability, get rid of special legal protections, get rid of the differences in taxes. All that stuff should go out the window if that's what you really believe. And most people don't believe that. So you can't pick and choose. If you're going to be a purist, you can't pick and choose. And I think that that's important for people on our side of the aisle to recognize. And I also think it's important for people on the left who have been anti-corporation for many, many years to be consistent with that and to say, okay, if you don't like big corporations because you think they're too powerful in the fossil fuel industry, then you can't just decide, well, I'm okay with it in social media, but I'm not okay with it in the fossil fuel industry. No. You need to be consistent. You're not okay with it, period. And we have some common ground there, and maybe we can find some common ground in productive ways to limit the power of corporations. I doubt it, but I'm hoping that we can find that common ground, because this is something that people on the far left have been saying for a long time too, to varying degrees on other issues. So it is important for people to keep that in mind. This is not a free market system, and so we shouldn't allow people to make the argument that we should just leave them alone because of the free market. It's just flat out not true.
Okay. I mean, it's definitely a topic that we're going to, like Justin said, I think that this is going to be a topic of conversation within conservative and libertarian circles over the next couple of years, depending on how much corporations want to kind of flex this power. We'll see what happens. So yeah, I'm sure we'll be talking about this in the future. One other topic that we want to kind of touch on is Joe Biden's first day. Woo! Everyone's so excited. You guys watched the inauguration?
Nope.
Isaac? Wait, what? Who's Joe Biden?
Oh, Kamala Harris is
VP.
Right.
Wait, I forgot. Yeah, Kamala Harris's first day. Yeah. Yeah, I saw that. It was great. It was really special.
So, amongst some of the stories that we could talk about when it comes to that, he did issue a number of executive orders that targeted topics such as COVID, climate change, immigration, energy, and more. So some of them are kind of interesting. Some of them are a little bit whatever. It's not like the biggest deal in the world. One of them, they extended the pause on having to pay back your student loans for like another 9 months or something like that.
That triggered me hard.
Did they do that?
Yeah.
It's 9 more months of me not having to pay my student loans?
End of September. Yeah.
Wow.
Come on, get it together.
That's great.
You're a dirtbag.
Yeah. Also, Isaac, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're back in the climate Paris Accord, something like that.
In 30 days, baby.
30 days. And then he also, I think one of the executive orders had to do with stopping the pipeline, Keystone pipeline. So, Isaac, what's your reaction to some of these things? What do you think?
I mean, some of this stuff was preventable. Donald Trump should have submitted the Paris Accord to the Senate and had them vote it down. Didn't do it, so that's on him. And
hold on, wait a second, real quick, Isaac. Can you explain what? I mean, I don't understand how Joe Biden is able to unilaterally put us in the treaty in the first place. Like, I don't really understand that.
Well, that's the thing, because when the Obama administration signed us up for it in 2015, they said it was a treaty, but it was never a treaty because it never got ratified by the Senate. So that's why they said it was a treaty publicly. Technically, they called it an accord. And like the Trump administration did the wrong thing by not just immediately pulling out of the treaty. I mean, he said he did, but like he should have just submitted it to the Senate. They would have shot a bunch of holes in it, said no, and then we would have been out of it forever, because it's not the president's ability to unilaterally get us into a treaty. I think you need 60 votes or maybe even 2/3 of the Senate to agree to a treaty. And they did that because treaties supersede the U.S. Constitution. Like any treaty that we enter into, the treaty could say you don't have a First Amendment anymore. And if we adopted the treaty, that would supersede the Constitution. Like that's the way it works. So that's why it's such a big deal.
So is it just meaningless then? Like, is it just a pointless, like, does it have any sort of weight behind it at all? Yeah, teeth. I mean, if it's not, if it's not really a treaty, and then then what is it? I don't even really understand what it is.
It's an agreement for massive transfer of wealth from the rich West, especially United States, to developing countries.
That's true. But what's the difference between Joe Biden just giving a speech and saying this is the direction of America? Like, what's the difference, really?
So we don't know right now. That's going to all get shaken out in the courts, most likely. And I don't know enough about this to say, how it's going to end up. But the thought process is the Trump administration may have lent legitimacy to the accord by not just submitting it to the Senate and saying, hey, do this. So by, not going through the normal treaty process and going through the protocol that was established by the Obama administration, some people think that adds enough legitimacy to the action to maybe give it more force of law. I don't agree with that personally. Who knows what the Supreme Court is going to think about it? But that's kind of one of the problems with the way that this got handled, right? So it could be as, harmless, right, as Joe Biden going out there and making this speech, or it could, potentially have the, treaty effect. So we really don't know. And it is just a huge wealth transfer from developed nations to the developing world. And, we're going to implement all of these policies that increase the cost of electricity and energy in the United States. China's going to continue to peak their emissions sometime around 2030. If you believe they're going to do that, I've got a bridge to sell you.
Right. It'll keep going.
There was really is interesting. This is a total side note here, but I think it's worth talking about for 30 seconds. There's a New York Times article that talked about how China was using slaves in, I am not going to get the name of the province right, but where all the Uyghur internment camps are, they're using slaves to build solar panels. And everybody's like, oh, wow, the price of solar came down. I'm like, oh, God, you use slaves. Of course it came down.
What a disaster.
Yeah. One of the things Trump, aside from submitting the Paris Climate Accord to the Senate as a treaty, and you're right, Isaac, I think the fact that he didn't lends a lot of credence to the fact that a president may never, ever submit a treaty to the Senate ever again if they can get away with this. Why would you bother? It would be much too risky. You would never do it again. So we may have seen our last treaty ever submitted to the United States Senate. But he could have also... He could have done this and it would have been actually really good optics or it would have forced Biden to reverse it. He could have issued an executive order on his way out the door, banning American companies from purchasing any products made with slave labor. Apple would be in big trouble. Obviously, the solar panel companies in this country, renewable energy companies in America would be in big trouble. And he would have forced Joe Biden to add reversing a ban on Americans getting slave labor products to his list of things that he reversed. And I heard people encouraging Trump to do that on his way out. I'm sure he heard it. It's a real damn shame that he didn't do it.
Yeah, no. Remember that one report that we covered? It was from Australian think tank or something, and it outlined all of these corporations that had manufacturing that used Uyghur slave labor. So there'd be a number of companies that would be affected by that.
Yeah, well, I want to talk real quickly about the Keystone XL pipeline too, though. Do we have time for that?
Yeah, 2.5 minutes.
So I think that this is really incredible in a lot of ways. Not only is it just completely ridiculous, because obviously the Keystone XL pipeline. So this has been going on since 2008. For years and years and years, despite numerous times during the Obama era of different government agencies and experts and environmentalists saying that there's not any significant environmental harm or increase in CO2 emissions or any of these other things that are going to result from this pipeline. The Obama administration because they are beholden to a lot of far left-wing environmental groups, decided they were going to kill it. Then the Trump administration approves it. They are constructing it. And in the midst of that, Joe Biden comes in and kills it on day one. And the Wall Street Journal did several really good articles about this, but one of them pointed out that this was 10,000 union construction jobs that were killed because this pipeline was killed. 1,000 people were told that they were going to be laid off on the day that this happened, the steel that was going to be made in the United States as we're building this pipeline, all of that's been lost. They had agreed, this company TC, I forget what it's called.
TransCanada,
yeah, exactly. They had agreed to fund a $10 million green jobs training fund to help make this more palatable. They agreed to $500 million for indigenous suppliers and jobs. They agreed to make the pipeline itself, the operation of the pipeline, 100% dependent on renewable energy sources, all to appease the left. And Joe Biden killed it anyway. 10,000 union jobs on day one. And I was thinking, can you think of another time in the whole history of the United States that a president on day one killed 10,000 jobs? And you know what? I don't think this has ever happened. And not just jobs, union jobs.
Mr. The Steelworkers Union endorsed him.
Yes.
Pipeline Union. Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so Mr. Union, Joe Biden, Mr. Hardworking, lunch pail Joe or whatever, kills 10,000 union jobs on day one. I don't think I have ever heard of anyone even considering doing something like this. And he did it literally on day one in a blink of an eye, didn't even care about all of the other stuff. And all to do what? It's not going to change. It's not going to change global temperature at all. Not at all. No matter what you believe, it's not going to do anything.
Well,
so that does is kill the economy. I mean, it's amazing.
That oil's coming out of those tar sands in Alberta, whether they like it or not. And now they're going to be put on. Now they're going to be put on tanker rails, and then that is much more dangerous than putting it through a pipeline. You see derailments all the time.
Well,
it's inexplicable.
To Joe Biden's credit, he probably didn't know he was doing any of this. He probably doesn't even know he's president right now. So
come on, man.
Listen here, Jack. All right, that's it.
Me and my pal Corn Pop didn't cancel any union jobs.
Thank you for
I'll make more leg. I'll have more jobs. People touching the hair on my legs.
For this episode of
How curly it got in the sun.
If you like our show, please subscribe, write a review for us on iTunes. It'd be greatly appreciated. You can find us on Stitcher, Google, YouTube, pretty much everything nowadays. Don't follow us on Twitter because it's socialist. If you want to send us your comments, questions, concerns, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook, Twitter, and Parler whenever it comes back to life, if it ever comes back to life. And also, I just want to point out that isn't it amazing how the more incoherent an impression is of this person, the more realistic it sounds? I think it's amazing. Truly amazing.
Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At Jay Lakely on Twitter. You can also follow the Heartland Institute at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always visit, until it gets nuked from space, heartland.org.
Isaac Orr, same question.
At CornPop46 on Twitter.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week.